Iron and steel factories come up in India next. The year was 1904 in the hot month of April. Charles Weld, an American geologist, and Dorabji Tata and adult son of the Jamsted Tata next were traveling in Chittorgarh and Chhattisgarh in search of iron ore deposits. Next, they had spent many months on a costly venture looking for source of good iron ore to set up a modern iron and steel plant in India. Tata had decided to spend a large part of his fortune to build a big iron and the spent the India next. But this could not be done without identifying the source of fine quality iron ore. Next, one day after traveling for many hours in the forest, wet and the Tata came upon a small village and found a group of men and women carrying basket loads of iron ores. These people were aggressive. Next, when asked where they had found the iron ore, the Agarisis pointed to a hill in the distance. Next, Weld and Dorabji Tata reached the hill after an exhausting trek through dense forest. On exporting the hill, the geologist declared that the head and at last found what they had been looking for, Rajhara Hills and one of the finest ore in our world. Next, but there was a problem. The region was dry and water necessary of running in the factory was not to be found nearby. The Tatas had continued their search for a more suitable place to set up their factory. Next, however, the Agarizis helped in the discovery of a source of iron ore that would later supply that Bhilai steel plant. Next, a few years later, a large area of forest was cleared on the banks of the river to set up the factory and an industrial township. Jamshedpur, here there was water near iron ore deposits. Next, the Tata Iron and Steel Company, TISCO, that came up began producing steel in 1912. TISCO was set up and an opportunate time. All through the late 19th century, India was importing steel that was manufactured in Britain. Expansion of the railways in India had provided a hug market for rails that Britain produced for a long while. British experts in the Indian railways were unwilling to believe that good quality steel could be produced in India. Next, by the time Tisco was set up, the situation was changing in 1914. The First World War broke out. Steel produced in Britain now had to meet the demands of war in Europe, so imports of British steel into India declined dramatically, and the Indian Railways turned to Tisco for supply of rails as the war dragged on several years. Tisco had to produce cells that carries wheels for the war. By 1919, the colonial government was buying 90% of the steel manufactured by Tisco. Over time, Tisco became the biggest steel industries within the British Empire. Next, in the case of iron and steel, as in the case of cotton textiles, industrial expansion occurred only when British imports into India declined and the market for Indian industrial goods increased. Next, This happened during the First World War and after. As the nationalized movement developed and the industrial class became stronger, the demand for government protection became louder, struggling to retain its control over India. The British government had to concede many of these demands in the last decided to the colonial rule. Next, the history of industrializations of Japan in the late 19th centuries present a contrast to thought of India. The colonial state in India need to expand the market for British goods was unwilling to support Indian industrializations in Japan. The state encouraged the growth of industries. Next, how do the names of different textiles tell us about their histories? Next, why did he wool and silk produced in England protest against the import of Indian textile in the early 18th century? Next, how did the development of cotton industries in Britain affect textile producers in India? Next, why did the Indian iron smelting industries decline in the 19th century? Next, what problem did the Indian textile industries face in the early years of its development? Next, what helped Tisco expand steel productions during the First World War? Next, find out about the history of any craft around the area you live. You may wish to know about the community of craftsmen, the change in the techniques they use, and the markets they supply. How have those changed in the past 50 years? Next, on a map on India, locate the centers of different crafts today. Find out when these centers came up. Next, let us look at what the British thought and did, and how some of the ideas of education that we now take or granted involved in the last 200 years. In the process of this inquiry, we will also see how Indians reacted to British ideas and how they developed their own view about how Indians were to be educated.